Remaining awake through a great revolution, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his last Sunday sermon, this sermon, at the National Cathedral on March 31st, 1968. Hear his words. I would like to use as a subject for which to preach this morning, remaining awake through a great revolution. The text for this morning is found in the book of Revelation. Behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away. I'm sure that most of you have read that arresting little story from the pen of Washington Irving entitled Rip Van Winkle. The one thing that we usually remember about the story is that Rip Van Winkle slept 20 years. But the most striking thing about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not merely that Rip slept 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. While he was peacefully snoring up in the mountain, a revolution was taking place that at points would change the course of history. And Rip knew nothing about it. He was asleep. Yes, he slept through a revolution. And one of the great liabilities of life is that all too many people find themselves living amid a great period of social change, and yet they fail to develop the new attitudes, the new mental responses that the new situation demands. They end up sleeping through a revolution. Yes, we do live in a period where changes are taking place, and there is still the voice crying through the vista of time saying, Behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away. Now, whenever anything new comes into history, it brings with it new challenges and new opportunities. First, we are challenged to develop a world perspective. No individual can live alone, no nation can live alone, and anyone who feels that he can live alone is sleeping through a revolution. The world in which we live is geographically one. The challenge that we face today is to make it one in terms of brotherhood. Through our scientific and technological genius, we have made this world a neighborhood, and yet we have not had the ethical commitment to make it a brotherhood. But somehow, in some way, we got it to do this. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. We are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. Secondly, we are challenged to eradicate the last vestiges of racial injustice from our nation. I must say this morning that racial injustice is still the black man's burden and the white man's shame. It is an unhappy truth that racism is a way of life for the vast majority of white Americans, spoken and unspoken, acknowledged and denied, subtle and sometimes not subtle. That disease of racism permeates and poisons a whole body politic. And I can see nothing more urgent than for America to work passionately and unrelenting to get rid of the disease of racism. Something positive must be done. Everyone must share in the guilt as individuals and as institutions. The government must certainly share the guilt. Individuals must share the guilt. And even the church must share the guilt. We must face the sad fact that at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, when we stand to sing, In Christ there is no east or west, we must stand in the most segregated hour of America. There's another thing closely related to racism that I would like to mention as another challenge. We are challenged to rid our nation and the world of poverty. Like a monstrous octopus, poverty spreads its nagging, prehensile tentacles into hamlets and villages all over our world. 2/3 of the people of the world go to bed hungry tonight. They are ill housed, they are ill nourished, and they are shabby clad. I've seen it in Latin America. I've seen it in Africa. I've seen this poverty in Asia. Not only do we see poverty abroad, I would remind you that in our very own nation, that about 40 million people are poverty stricken. I have seen them here and there. I have seen them in the ghettos of the north, and I've seen them in the rural areas of the south. I've seen them in Appalachia. I have just been in the process of touring many areas in our country, and I must confess that in some situations, I've literally found myself crying. And the tragedy is, so often these 40 million people are invisible because America is so affluent, so rich. Because our expressways carry us from the ghettos, we don't see the poor. This America's opportunity, this is America's opportunity to help bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. The question is whether is America willing to do this? There is nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we have the techniques, the resources to rid our country of poverty. The real question is whether we have the will. In a few weeks, some of us will be coming to Washington to see if the will is still alive or if it's alive in this nation. We are coming to Washington in a poor people's campaign. Yes, we are going to bring the tired, the poor, and the huddled masses. We're going to bring those who have known long years of hurt and neglect. We're going to bring those who have come to feel that life is long and a desolate corridor with no exit signs. We're going to bring children and adults and old people and people who have never seen a doctor or a dentist in their lives. We're not coming to engage in any histrionic gesture. We're not coming to tear up Washington. We're coming to demand that the government addresses itself to the problem of poverty. We're coming to ask America to be true to the huge promissory note that is signed years ago. We're coming to engage in dramatic, nonviolent action to call attention to the gulf between promise and fulfillment, to make the invisible visible. No, why? Why do we do this? We do this because it's our experience that the nation doesn't move around questions of genuine equality for the poor and for the black people until it's confronted massively, dramatically, in terms of direct action. And I submit that nothing will be done until people of goodwill put their bodies and souls in motion. And it will be the kind of soul force brought into being as a result of this confrontation that I believe will make the difference. I want to say one other challenge that we face is simply we must find an alternative to war and bloodshed. Anyone who feels, and there are still a lot of people who feel that way, that war can solve the social problems facing mankind, they are sleeping through a great revolution. I am convinced that it's one of the most unjust wars that has ever been fought in the history of the world. Our involvement in the war in Vietnam has torn up the Geneva Accord. It has strengthened the military industrial complex. It's strengthened the forces of reaction in our nation. It has put us against the self determination of a vast majority of the Vietnamese people. And it's put us in the position of protecting a corrupt regime that is stacked against the poor. This is where we are. Mankind must put an end to war. Our war will put an end, or war will put an end to our mankind. And the best way to start is to put an end to the war in Vietnam. It's no longer a choice, my friends, between violence and nonviolence. It is either nonviolence or non-existence. And this is why I felt the need of raising my voice against the war and working wherever I can to rouse the conscience of a nation on it. I remember so well when I first took a stand against the war in Vietnam. The critics took me on, and they had their say in the most negative and sometimes the most vicious of ways. Ultimately, a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus. On some positions, cowardice asks the questions, is it expedient? And then the expedience comes along and asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? Conscience asks the question, is it right? There comes a time when one must take the position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do it because conscience tells him it is right. I believe today that there is a need for all people of goodwill to come with a massive act of conscience and say, in the words of the old Negro spiritual, we ain't going to study war no more. Let me close. Let me close by saying that we have difficult days ahead in the struggle for justice and peace. But I will not yield to a politic of despair. I'm going to maintain hope as we come to Washington in this campaign. The cards are stacked against us. This time we will really confront a Goliath. God grant that we will be the Davids of truth set out against the Goliath of injustice, the Goliath of neglect, the Goliath of refusing to deal with the problems, and go on with determination to make America the truly great America that it's called to be. And so, however dark it is, however deep the angry feelings are, and however violent expulsions are, I can sing, "We shall overcome. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth, crushed to the earth, will rise again. With this faith, we'll be able to hew out of the mountain of despair the stones of hope. With this faith, we'll be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Thank God for John, who centuries ago, out in a lonely, obscure island called Patmos, caught a vision of a new Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God, who heard a voice saying, "Behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away." God grant that we will be participants in the newness and the magnificent development. If we will do it, we will bring about a new day of justice and brotherhood and peace. And that day, the morning stars will sing together and the sons of God will shout for joy. God bless you.